Good morning, my fellow yogic travelers. I am mighty glad to be alive today, and I hope that you are too. Continuing this week with my tribute to Robert Moore, one of my male mentors. Practicing the presence is what today's little Dharma rap is all about. First thing I'd like to say is you depreciate your own intellect if you don't participate in your own mythic imagination. Everybody has a deep archetypal template for the essence self. It's the center not only of an individual, but of the collective unconscious as well. We all share this. But not to know this puts you at a deficit, because then you think your ego is in control instead of the great other, the great self. Now, unfortunately, historical events have led to a decline in the importance of the spiritual dimension of life, since everything has become secularized. And so, therefore, the worth of human consciousness as a transcendental model has been lost for a great many people. Since the Reformation onward, there's been an attack on symbolic images and even ritual process in the same way that the ancient ancestors understood and practiced and benefited from. So there's a depression, as far as I'm concerned, when you're disconnected from the source of yourself, which is what yoga also says, that the real cause of suffering is not knowing the truth about yourself or the truth about the source of consciousness. So the main task of the ego is to recognize its relationship to the self and not think of itself as the center of everything, like the Ptolemaic revolution from the Copernican revolution. I should say the Copernican revolution from the Ptolemaic revolution. Right? The earth is not the center. You got to wake up to realizing the sun is the center. So in the same way, if you think that the ego is the center of your life, you're functioning at a disadvantage as far as I'm concerned. So also the increasing impact of psychological theory, which has a kind of reductionistic aspect, because until you get to what I would call humanistic psychology, where they even acknowledge the importance of having some spiritual values in your life, then everything you do revolves around the memory of the ego and its biography, as if that is who you are. And I never say that dealing with any kind of past trauma or memories that have left you unsettled or feeling unworthy, it's not pointless, but it's endless. You can always keep mining that stuff and still never get to the essence of who you are that isn't your biography, although, of course, you can't deny your incarnation. So, have you found sacred space? One of the keys about sacred space is when you're in sacred space, you feel regenerated. You come back as if you were born again. If you haven't found that, that's a sign. You haven't melted. You haven't learned how to dissolve yourself, to remake yourself. So one of the first things they always say, and certainly this is true in yoga, is look for a teacher or an elder to project on them, idealize them for a while, as a kind of magician figure who holds your projection of the center that you seek. And if they're true, then they don't take advantage. They don't exploit you in any vulnerability that you bring to them. And they teach you to practice the presence, to bring all your activities back to the sense of being in the moment, feeling the aliveness of spirit. And you can't do this if you have difficulty with pattern recognition, looking at the habits that have prevented you, that have hindered you, that have been obstacles to you doing this. Because otherwise, you act in a way where, out of ignorance and aggression, as Jesus would say, forgive them, for they don't know what they do. They know not what they do. So you can see the effect of people in the world doing things and not realizing what the impact of it is on other people. No consideration. And because there are very few cultural supports for bringing this realization into our daily life, and most of our daily life is artificial and superficial, these things have declined in recent centuries. But there's always been people who say no matter how it seems the cards are stacked against us, we got to give it a try. So even if it's loosely organized right now, you're going to expand your bandwidth to oscillate with this and vibrate with this and resonate with this, and then of course bring it into the world. That's the most important thing. Unfortunately, all religious language in a certain way is idolatrous because it's trying to speak about something that can't be said. So we're talking about having an experience. And even though I'm always talking about the mythic imagination and the story that used to cohere for a given society, I'm not so naive to think that just because I know that that's enough. We have to try to understand what the ancients were doing with their ritual enactments, the embodiment of their myths through ceremony and their daily life, and yet realize that can't be adapted completely in the same way for the modern era and the contemporary world we live in. So remember that when you practice the presence, you come into a non-denominational, or I should say post-denominational mindset about spirituality, which makes you realize that the scourge of human history has been malignant tribalism, sticking to your own kind and thinking that we are better than anybody else. And the nightmare of history, the catastrophe of existence, shows you what happens when people do that. We haven't yet evolved as a species to the next level. So first, to practice the presence, remember that all pre-modern people understood that there is a center out there. First, you need to recognize that, and second, you need to relate to it, respect it, and then fully commune with it. That is how you practice the presence. Otherwise, you'll be a blockhead, and you'll have to have adversarial symptoms come up in your life to gobsmack you up the side of your head and make you realize that the things that you take for granted in your world have to be seen through so that you could fully come into this state of practicing the presence. And that simply means coming back to the here and now, being fully alive, and fitting everything you do in your life to this overarching pattern of harmony. You could call it the Dharma, you could call it the Tao, you could call it Ma'at, you could call it the Torah, you could call it the Way, it doesn't matter. They're all choices between mistakes. But it hooks you up and makes your life filled with significance. And then at that point, you just want to bring out and radiate the goodness that you have. Remember, don't expect the world to bring you happiness. You bring your happiness to the world, and you show everybody the joy of devotion by the works that you do. And that means celebrate with everyone and have compassion on the people who are suffering. Practice the presence.